Hello and welcome to Australia in Space TV. My name is Chris Cubbage. I'm the editor with My Security Media. Today we're joined by Daniel O'Toole, Manager Space with the Defence and Space Centre of Excellence with Austrade, the Australian Trade and Investment Commission. Daniel's going to give us a good overview of Austrade and their functions, particularly introducing the Australian space industry to our partners around the world. Very busy team, this in particular, but a great update from Daniel. So without further ado, Daniel O'Toole. Daniel O'Toole, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks, Chris. Good to be with you.
Wonderful. Now, this is a very broad discussion. We'll have a look at your role. You're Manager Space, Defence and Space Centre of Excellence with Austrade, or the Australian Trade and Investment Commission. So you've got a large sort of sector to look at, and we're obviously looking at a global sector. A lot of changes in the Australian space industry as well, and looking out as well as looking in. I think, Leah, let's start with your role. We have had you on a panel before with our Space Hub event back in May when we looked at the UK and Australia Space Bridge. So we did have some insights there. But yeah, your general role and your current focus for the Australian space industry.
Yeah, sure. Just, I guess, a bit of background around the organisation, if people aren't aware of us. The Australian Trade Investment Commission is the government's international trade promotion and investment attraction agency. We basically work with Australian exporters to provide them, opportunities in new market, and also assist investors who are interested in Australia. We also have a large remit around tourism policy programs and research. There's a big push within the organisation at the moment around how to revive the visitor economy. So there's a strong role there, and obviously international education is a major export of Australia. So that's another big focus for the organisation. In terms of how my role fits, so we have sector teams within Austrade that inform different industries and help our various arms, our client-facing arms, connect people up in the best way possible. And my team focuses on just defence and space, and so we have MOUs with the Department of Defence, leading from the Defence Export Strategy that was launched several years ago, and also the Australian Space Agency. So I manage a small team that just look at space industry initiatives, work, information gathering, etc. And we work with the Space Agency quite closely on joint initiatives, industry promotion activities, information, research, that sort of thing.
Yeah, you mentioned it's a small team, and it's one of those things with Austrade is you've got such a big sort of portfolio and charter, but sometimes it can be struggled and stretched in terms of resources. So I suppose you have to focus into certain sectors, and I think that sort of might highlight the UK space bridge as well. How do you manage those, and what are your key sort of focus points at the moment?
So I suppose I should caveat by saying that my team isn't very large, but part of what we do is the Sector Centre of Excellence is try and build a community of practice, and that's one of our big focuses at the moment. So Austrade has about 106 offices around the world. 68 of those are overseas in 48 different countries. There's 1,200 people across the entire organisation thereabouts. So it's quite a big organisation, and we are trying to foster expertise in key markets to help make our network space literate. And that's not just the offshore network; it's also the teams who are focused on expanding exporters in Australia or assisting inbound investors. So we're trying to build a network of people who understand space and can assist in that way. But you're quite right; we do need to focus in our efforts on a few things. So we try and do a few things well, and part of that is focusing on internal comms and having that piece where we can educate our own network, but also providing a few, I suppose, opportunities for industry to shine in markets that are considered important. So we do lead major industry promotion initiatives with the Australian Space Agency. Some of that is in the form of providing whole of government joined up support for major trade missions. Those are led often by the Department of Defence or the Australian Space Agency. We usually play more of a supporting role there, but it is about trying to maximise the opportunity. Good examples of that would be the Colorado Space Symposium that was in April of this year. We had a delegation of around 38 Australian organisations who were at that. It was a really big event that it was led by Team Defence Australia with the strong support from the Austrade-Space Agency, but we organised the industry delegation. We just a delegation at the Farnborough International Air Show that was much more of a sort of mixed defence and space event, because it is primarily an aerospace event, but that got quite a significant amount of focus. And then we also will have a presence, or the agency will be leading a presence at the International Astronautical Congress in Paris later this year.
Nice.
So yeah, just in terms of our focus countries, I mean, we obviously we go where the interest is, but you know, I think it's fair to say that North America is going to remain a strong target. We're partially led by the Space Agency and the initiatives that it leads. So North America to start with, because you've got the Moon to Mars program. We are obviously quite interested in Europe just because of the incredible footprint of ESA. So that's something we're looking to develop. India will be an increasing focus for us. It's something that's a bit more nascent, but with the India ISI, the International Space Investment Initiative, the agency's launch, we expect to see more interest there. And of course, East Asia. So I've just spent some recent time in Japan as well.
And what are some of the outcomes? We were aware that you went to Japan and you spent some time there. And having a look at your antecedents, you're familiar with Japan as well. What are some of the outcomes with Japan and Australia-Japan relationships for the space sector? Well,
there are already strong existing linkages between Australia and Japan when it comes to space. Obviously, the recent collaboration on Hayabusa 2, which landed in Woomera only a couple of years ago. The Australian Space Agency has led a lot of that relationship with JAXA, and that's only getting stronger. There's interest, I think, from JAXA to do more with the Australian Space Agency. So they do have a growing arrangement that they're building to collaborate on certain scientific research projects. How Australia can feed in and support JAXA. I think there's also, in terms of outcomes from the visit, there's a lot we can learn from them. One of the things that we found quite interesting is the way that they're viewing their domestic industry. So the Australian Space Agency was set up, very much initially as a very industry-focused space agency. So it's one of the things that we have to explain to a lot of international partners, is that it's not like NASA or CNES or JAXA, where it's a huge R&D group on its own. It's primarily a policy-setting agency, a regulator, and a strategy building agency. But they also have they also now have missions, so they're now procuring. So they're kind of transitioning into something more. But it's as a result, they're an agency that looks at ways to provide opportunities for the sector to grow, as opposed to trying to build its own major R&D programs. And the Japanese have had a really interesting model, I think, that we could probably learn from, where JAXA, they obviously have their own R&D programs, but they've also changed the way that they approach funding the industry. So they now put a pot of money into a sort of a third-party owned sort of venture capital fund that they have with other government agencies that funds early stage companies, and they're also taking direct equity stakes in companies as well. So there's a lot, I think, from a policy and an industry mechanism standpoint that we could probably learn. Industry as a whole, we do see opportunities to kind of leverage Australia's, probably our expertise in developing downstream applications for space technologies, but also obviously our geography. I mean, Hayabusa is a bit of an example of that. Just using our wide geography to help support landing for Japanese scientific research missions. But more broadly, how do we feed into the Japanese space infrastructure projects using some of those advantages?
Nice. And how does that then link? Because again, you mentioned India, the US, UK, we've mentioned, and Europe. How are you bringing all these together? Do you think, is it the space bridge approach that you might be sort of introducing with Japan and America as the model or the framework that the UK space bridge provides?
So, I mean, it's always a possibility. The Australia-UK space bridge came about following a similar arrangement with the fintech industry. Yeah. But as an arrangement, it is fairly unique. It's something that we've had interest from other agencies, in exploring. But they're also quite significant commitments. I think if we were to enter into another space bridge arrangement, we would have to be, I think we would have to be sure that we could resource it appropriately. So the UK Australia Space Bridge is about 18 months old. We've been able to get some great outcomes from it. The SmartSat UK Space Catapult Space Bridge grant is a good example of that, and we are keen to see where there are opportunities to do more things like that. But it's frankly a matter of seeing where we can get the support because they're quite significant processes. And with the United States, frankly, I don't really know if it's strictly speaking quite as necessary, because we have the Moon to Mars arrangement, which is driving the interest on its own. I mean, when you have a pot of $150 million pushing you to partner with a country, it does a bit of the work for you.
Well, that's a good answer, I suppose. It just shows that the UK Australia Space Bridge, as it's been termed, will likely be unique, and other arrangements with other countries are likely to be under their own sort of model or trade agreements and priorities, I suppose. Would that be about right?
Yeah, I think it's a case-by-case approach. I mean, we look for the best ways to work with countries and how they're most likely to be effective, I guess, for their particular case.
Yeah. Maybe a little bit more on India. What's the status with India? New South Wales Investment New South Wales is sort of focusing on India quite a lot, definitely on our radar as well. The Australia-India space relationship and Austrade's involvement there, what would be some of the priorities? We've got some events coming up in Bengaluru as well.
Yeah, so Austrade's involvement has been a little bit more limited to date with India. I mean, part of it is simply a bandwidth problem. Like I said, we have a relatively small team, but we do see with the launch of the India ISI probably a growing need. The challenge we've had with Bengaluru is that it's right up next to the IAC, which just makes it's a capacity challenge to do them both. But we do see, the potential to do more with India in the future, probably, at another time that isn't right next to IC. It's a particularly tricky time of the year when you're talking about engaging industry. September, everyone wants to do something in September. But we do see, I think, a need to probably increase our focus there. The ISI being $25 million, we're going to see quite a lot of interest from Australian companies. We expect in trying to learn more about the Indian space ecosystem. So they've run a few events in the last couple of years. They've been virtual sort of Bengaluru conferences, and our team at Post have supported virtual showcases. I spoke at one of these. So I think it's just a matter of, at the moment, building awareness between the two countries about where we can play. I mean, Israel have a fairly ambitious program to develop their own sector and open it up. Like the Australian government, they recognise that space is a sector built on international partnerships. So it's an important one for us to develop.
And maybe we'll highlight the Andy Thomas Space Foundation, the Space Forum in October. Do you, I take it, facilitate back into Australia as well as in terms of the, and we've got Avalon as well coming up. Yep. So also getting the international space sector to understand the Australian market and the opportunities here?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're in touch with a number of countries who are exploring sending international delegations to Australia for either the Australian Space Forum or the Avalon Air Show. We were just on the phone to the organisers of Avalon yesterday. They're working closely with the Space Industry Association of Australia to see how they can jointly develop a bit of a space event around Avalon, so they can combine their efforts. Yep. And obviously there'll be a lot of interest for particularly the kind of more dual use type elements of space and defence who'll want to attend that event, because it's a only every 2 years and it's quite a significant undertaking, Avalon. So we expect quite a lot of interest there, and we work very closely with our offshore colleagues who are connected often with the governments who are organising those delegations. We're aware, for example, that the French are quite keen to send a delegation in October for that space forum. Right. There are others as well.
What's the what are some of the key strengths do you see in the Australian space industry for that international engagement? Is there anything that's really standing out for you in terms of company profiles or technology profiles that are getting a lot of traction and interest. For example, the IAC sort of delegation to Paris, the sort of the profiles of that delegation?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of areas to cover, but Australia does have really, really incredible capability that's developing. The number of space companies is growing. I think at last count, it was the number of them. It's about 5.7% per year. The agency's calculated. The areas of strength do roughly align with our 7 civil space priority areas. From an investment attraction standpoint, Austrade sees quite a lot of interest in launch. There's a range of factors that are driving that, we think, least of all being, or most of all, I think, probably being the bottlenecks that we're expecting to see around demand for launch. So various estimates in the United States and other places see the global launch infrastructure as reaching capacity with the number of satellites that are being planned. I think there was an article recently that showed Kuiper that out of Amazon had bought most of the excess supply of launch in the United States, whilst in Europe, whilst we need to have an arrangement with ESA to be a player. Europe still has its own growing demand for launch, and the loss of Proton and Soyuz for ESA will create an increasing burden on the Ariane platforms and also the sites that they launch from. So we expect to see more interest out of that. And you've seen, obviously, ELA earlier this year, their success with NASA launching the sounding rockets, and there's obviously Southern Launch and Gilmore developing their own sites. So there's a lot of activity around the launch industry. More broadly, we have strong capability that really leverages a lot of our geographical strengths in the ground stations segment. So we have arrangements with a lot of international communications providers to establish ground stations here. And similarly, the growing for space situational awareness. Australia's got some really great companies doing some quite interesting things there. Sort of thinking of companies like Silentium Defence, High Orbit Robotics, one of the startups based here in Sydney. Obviously Sabre Astronautics and others who are developing either visualization tools or sensors and other platforms. There's a group out of Western Sydney University who have neuromorphic cameras, etc. Some very interesting capabilities that are of interest to a lot of different players.
Sorry, go. I was going to say, because it is the size of the industry, as you say, is growing, but they are quite focused and familiar. We've actually done some interviews with some of those that mentioned. But
yes.
Sorry, I interrupted, but go on.
Yeah, so like I said, when you talk about the capability, you can talk for quite a while.
Yes, good.
This is a good thing. But we're also seeing, I think, a lot of strength around analytics as well. So Earth observation is an area where we do see significant potential. I mean, the Earth observation roadmap, did outline some fairly impressive statistics. I think it had a $283 million contribution to the economy directly, and wider economic benefits of around $2.5 billion. So there's a lot of companies who are, creating the analytics around EO that are doing some really impressive things. Yep. And then I think the other key point about space that we often like to drive home is that it is a really important enabler for a lot of other traditional industries. We spoke to companies. I mean, some of our high-profile companies like Fleet and Myriota, often work in the IoT space, and particularly around assisting, primary industries in a country as vast as Australia. Those solutions, are like it makes a lot of sense that they're born out of Australia. And one of the things that we found that's quite interesting, talking to some companies, we spoke to an ag tech business called FarmBot a little while back, who are effectively a remote asset sort of tracking and management tool that uses satellite data. They mentioned that the pandemic, for example, created this loss of seasonal workers that increased the uptick in demand and interest and openness to space technologies. And Australia's we often sort of self-critical about the fact that we have these sort of less complex industries, but those less complex industries are now effectively driving the need for more advanced tools as well.
you're right, sort of that disruption, the technology disruption in more traditional sectors. What would be sort of a key message for the sector? Are you aligning to the Australian Space Agency's roadmap program as a key driver? If anyone's sort of listening to this and they're thinking, okay, well, we're a sort of a startup space company, or we want to get more involved in a global market, what would be some of those sort of key messages that you would have, and how they go about it?
So it's quite timely. I was on a panel just yesterday talking about some of this stuff. One of the things that we often find is because the sector as a whole is still fairly early stage. A lot of these new entrants are spun out of universities and other research programs. To those companies, we encourage them to really think quite hard about what solution they're solving. We've seen sort of companies who've had to kind of iterate what their product is and what their market is. So I think the key kind of messages that we have for our companies, is to think very clearly about that. So the questions we often ask is, so what is the problem you're looking to solve? Or who is the customer for this? Where's the market? And what is the nature of your customer? I mean, space, we are seeing this incredible increase in private investment and private industry as a role, but government is still often one of the big customers for a lot of space services. Yeah. Right? I mean, there's in like the primary industries I mentioned, there's a strong private market there and business case for that. But the upstream side of things, governments build a lot of the satellites still. They launch a lot of the satellites. They're still a major customer. So understanding what implications that has for your business. If you're looking to expand overseas, does it mean you need to change your ownership model or explore overseas ownership models? Does it mean you have to approach development in a different way? And also, are you familiar with export controls? I mean, a lot of space technology is considered dual use. So those are all critical things that we encourage customers to understand. And how they pitch their products as well is a huge challenge we often find.
I suppose one last thing is, you mentioned the limitations, or potential limitations on that dual use. Is there still a lot of work to be done from Australia's perspective within our own trade agreements with our partner countries to allow that kind of thing? India might be one sort of limitation on that dual use defence versus just purely space. How much work still needs to be done there?
So there's it really depends on the segment you're looking at. I mean, the government has defence export controls and a clear, a clear list of limitations of what you can and cannot export. So often it's really more understanding where there might be limitations, in terms of what your product might be categorized as. It's usually more the upstream side of things we find. Yeah. For satellite technology, it's not such a big issue. The big challenge that most people would be aware of is around launch technologies. And because you've got the missile technology controls regime that basically, fundamentally, puts things in two buckets, a category 1 and a category 2. Anything that's in the first category, I think it's anything that's over 500 kilograms that can travel 300 kilometers is basically given a strong presumption of denial for tech transfer without a government-to-government arrangement. So in the media, you see a lot of news around or coverage around the US-Australia Technology Safeguards Agreement. That's what that's about. It's about providing a pathway for tech transfer for controlled technologies. So for the launch industry, it's a particularly challenging area because it sort of overlaps with non-proliferation mechanisms. And for other areas as well, it's probably more of an awareness thing. I mean, it's what satellite technologies, kind of fall in this grey bucket in a lot of places. So you need to make sure you're familiar with it.
Well, what would be your sort of call to action, and where can people find out more? I take it just going to austrade.gov.au?
Yes, that's right. I mean, the Austrade website will give you plenty of information around, what services are available to you. So we touched on it briefly, but in addition to our overseas network, if you are looking to connect with international businesses, we can leverage that network to help you understand what opportunities there might be or identify points of contact, etc. Austrade also does have a grant. It's called the Export Market Development Grant. It's sort of in 3 tiers, just depending on the stage of business that companies are at, but it's a forward-looking grant, so you can apply for it ahead of, say, traveling to the International Astronautical Congress. We'll be there. And we just closed our EOI process. It looks like we're going to have 37 odd organizations with us at the IAC, together with the Austrade-Space Agency at their stand. So that would probably be my call to action is, you know, if you're looking to get involved, please reach out to us. We do run a range of different initiatives to promote the sector. We're also currently working with industry to build a capability platform as well. You know, so we're looking for as many opportunities as possible to build the profile of the sector internationally, and always welcome to hear from industry if they have something they want to share.
Wonderful. Well, I'll give a shout out to Jess Bainbridge. She's with us. She's going to be in Paris. She's in London, but she'll be attending the IAC as well. And I think that's just a few weeks away. So Daniel O'Toole, Manager Space, Defence and Space Centre of Excellence. Thank you very much for joining us today on Australia in Space TV.
Thanks, Chris. Good to be with you.
Very good.